today we have with us Priyesh Srivastava, who is the co-founder of OnFinance AI. So we will be speaking to him and knowing about his journey. He and his co-founder Anuj was also in the Forbes 30 under 30 Asia list this time. So welcome Priyesh. It's a pleasure to be speaking to you.
Thank you for having me.
How are you? How are you doing?
Doing well. Doing well.
Okay, I would like to start by asking you, what is something not related to work that has been occupying your mind recently?
I'll struggle to answer that question honestly, right? Because a lot of what I do for entertainment related is also tech, right? It's just not AI, right? But it's also tech related around robotics stuff, right? So if you've been seeing the recent ones around Tesla Optimus, like the videos that they've been putting around full self driving and so on, very fascinated by all of that stuff. Right? I spend hours watching Boston Dynamics videos.
Very interesting.
So yeah, that's kind of been like a thing for me.
Okay. Let's start from your school days. So tell me, Priyesh was 10 years old, fifth, sixth standard.
Yeah.
What was Priyesh back then wanted to be when he wanted to grow up?
I mean, I can still be that, right? I was to be the prime minister, right? So that's still not off the books, hopefully.
Yeah.
Now that I'm eligible to stand in elections from next year onwards, after hitting 25 as well.
Yeah.
But yeah, definitely that was there. Was a lot into Beyblades around that time, right? A crazy amount of Beyblade stuff was happening around that time. Obviously, everyone in India, if you ask them, has some sad story around why they didn't play cricket.
Yeah.
Fortunately, I don't have one. So I was very much into basketball, right? But then I think it's a very height-gated thing, right? So obviously, it's not tall enough to qualify for any senior team and so on, right? But yes, so that's kind of been Priyesh at 10, I would say. Right?
But were you also like almost similar level of, did you have similar level of interest in tech back then as well?
Yes. So back then actually, so if you remember like the laptops of that time, right? So like this is around 12, 13. They were not good enough to run games, right? And the thing was you ended up going to these sites called A-Game, Miniclip, all of that, right? And playing some crazy amount of web games on the Java browser, right? And at that time you had to sort of like, when you're going into selecting a phone, right? It was like, does this have this game or that game or not? That is what we used to actually check in the store, not the price and all that stuff, right? Before like Play Store and all came into picture, it was only the pre-installed games that were coming in, right? But yes, definitely the first time I sort of got into tech, right, and realized, okay, like there's something called tech was at like, I think 6 or 7, right, wherein someone told me that, I mean, I guess, I don't know if it's legal or not, but like, someone told me that you get these Spider-Man CDs, right, the Spider-Man game one, like the one you can put in PC and play, right, you need to have a DVD marker and something to burn the game on, right. So what ended up happening was that I brought the DVD marker. I did not really understand what the burning part meant, right? So I just wrote the game's name on that, put it to the PC, and I was like, why is this just empty? Why is no game coming in, right? And that's the first time I sort of like started getting into, what is software and all of that stuff. But yeah. But I conventionally I got into coding quite late. I was around 17-ish.
Okay.
Like so, month or two before college started.
Very interesting. Even I remember just copy pasting some songs in the CD.
Yes.
And not doing that burn wala thing. And
I
was saying, what is this happening? Why is this not working? So very much relatable.
Yeah.
Okay, so you mentioned before you started college, a month or two back, you started with coding.
Yeah.
So like, I would like to understand what was your thought process back then. Like, did you start coding in a way to be prepared for what is going to come in college, or like just out of curiosity?
Oh no, I didn't get. So basically, what happened was in 12th, right, in CBSE, you have this computer science option, right?
Yeah.
And I don't think it's optional. I think it's like marked now, right? But you had to make a project for it at the end and give, right? So the only sort of website that I had interacted with beyond game websites was flight bookings, right? So what I was trying to do was I was trying to build like a flight booking website using purely Python. Very bad idea, I know, right? But I could not complete it well enough during the duration of the school year, right? So my whole goal was, can I finish this,
Oh, wow.
right? And that's how I started sort of getting into coding. Right?
Very interesting. So then you joined BITS Goa in 2017, right?
Yeah.
So I would like to know your whole 4-year journey at BITS Goa. And I think your last semester or last year, if I'm not wrong, must be ruined due to COVID. The
Yes.
third or fourth year.
No, last one.
Last one.
Yeah. So some part of the Senti sem and the 3-2 sem, right? So but the basic thing was that once in BITS Goa, right, I obviously took full advantage of the 0% attendance rule, right? There's only one sem where I have attendance, right, and I have like a 9 sem GPA for that sem, right? Oh, wow. Every other sem is 7.5, 7.5, 7.5, and that's how you get an 8 at graduation, right? And the thing was like, attendance was not really my thing, right? Not because I don't feel the subjects, because the subjects are very, very good, right? The point is that because they were not linear in order of the book, right? Because prior to college, you were used to studying from a book, right? Whereas in college, the profs were a different handout for every course. Chapter 3 was from some book, chapter 4 was from some book. So I was not really a big fan of that, right? So I really wanted to go and do that like a month before the exams, right? Where I would cover the topic and spend the rest of my time doing freelancing, taking like CTE courses, which is something we have in BITS Goa for like upskilling people, right, as a paid course and so on. Right? So that's what I spend most of my time on, right?
Very interesting. Even I could relate with this thing of not having all the topics in one book.
Yeah.
Because I found a lot of my friends struggling because they really wanted to study, but the way a topic was written in some other book and some other topic in some other book, like it was very emotional.
I mean, like, the thing is that, like, I mean, like, if I were in my first year now, that's probably what I would do. I would tell ChatGPT, hey man, take all these books, combine this into one book. I'll go to the Xerox shop, get a Xerox of all those pages, and now that's my textbook, right? But the thing is that doing that sort of like kind of interest, some amount of interest in like classroom learning, right? And second thing is around like the tutorial sections and all this stuff that used to happen around that. Like I don't need to go into details, right? You know, I know, right? What happens in tutorials. So that's been more or less what.
Also, so you had computer science in Goa.
Yes.
So you must also be getting triple E in Pilani, and like this is one of the confusions people have that if they are at a score of let's say 340 to 360, so whether they should go for Goa CS, Pilani triple E, or maybe Hyderabad CS if that at all comes into consideration.
Yes.
So how did you make that decision of going to Goa CS?
So for me it was always a question of branch, right? I had never filled in campus one above the other because I fundamentally do not think that really matters, right? I mean, kind of weird, but like yes. So the thing was the two options that I had. Like so, this was my second preference overall, and my first was Pilani CS, right? So Goa CS was my second preference, and on the JE side, the ones that I got was NID Suratkal CS, right? And this thing, ID Supermac, right? So my whole idea was that like why not just go to BITS Goa, right? And yeah, I think the decision works out really, really well. Like when you look back in hindsight, right? But yes,
very interesting. So Priyesh, I get to speak with a lot of people who have just joined college or are there in first or second year, and one of the prime confusions that I find those students tackling is whether they should just completely focus on academics and get a very high CG and then get into a good company, so to speak, follow the well set process, or they should focus on extracurriculars as well, or maybe try to build their own startup as well. So I want to know two things from you. Number one, what was your mindset as you mentioned in the first semester, first year? You studied, went to the all the classes, got a 9 CGPA.
No, that was not the full course. There was only one of the semesters.
Only one of the semesters.
Yeah.
So I wanted to understand from you, what was your thought process when you joined and you were with the mindset that 9 CG Rani hai, we have to go to all the classes, and then what changed later on?
So Classes that I went because there were a few very attractive people in class that I wanted to see every class, right? And I had no intent of like getting any CGP or whatever, like honestly. But the more important part is that even my first year I used to struggle very much with development, right? So obviously, like there were people who had been doing dev from their seventh, eighth grade, right? Who were very, very proficient, like, and they had the full, like like mastership grasp of it. Right? I never had that, right? So all my first year, I kind of did struggle to do that, right? The one reason why I realized okay, this changed, like, so there's two main points, right? The first one was in 1-2, right? Wherein I sort of saw that there was this app called Pawpals, right? So if you know, Goa has a lot of issues with like stray dogs and like I'm not saying like campus dogs and stuff like that, right? And there's n number of people responsible for feeding those animals, right? And to make sure that none of them get missed or like overfed, right? What we want to do is maintain an app of who is fed them, right? On a single TV and just keep track of all of that, right? So the first time I did that, I just wrote code as is, right? And then one of my batchmates corrected that code, right? And then he pushed it into production, right? And then it is when it started working. And at that point, I kind of realized, okay, this is how you write code, right? And that sort of clicked from there, right? Always been a big system design guy, right? And I think my third semester I worked for a business startup called Strategy, right? I was their first backend dev. Oh, wow. I wrote the quant engine for them, right? So basically, it was like if you tried out word quant, right? I had gotten it to be faster as well, right? Like significantly faster, right? And but after that, like so, I sort of gotten a hang of like okay, this does work, this does work, this does work, right? And then mostly like the thing where it became super clear to me was in my sixth semester, right? We have this optional course called software engineering, right? And when I did that course, like it became very abundantly clear to me, right? That system design is kind of my forte. And at that point, I sort of started taking this thing more seriously, right? Wherein I limited myself to one of two options, which is either do a CS PhD direct, it's like an undergrad PhD, or do a startup, right? Because those are the only two things which I felt were like uh, time value enough, right, to give an ROI for me, right? Given that I did get system design, but never really got into the habit of tracking industry papers just for the sake of it and publishing random stuff, right? Although I do have some publications in college, but yeah. Uh, so it's more of an all-round thing, right? And it's more of a preference thing. Like you should always do what you see yourself outperforming others at with same amount of effort, right? I guess because time is the same for everyone, right? So wherever you see yourself putting 2 hours, the other person puts in 2 hours, so you get a higher GPA than them consistently, then go ahead and do that, right? If you see someone puts in 2 hours and you put in 2 hours and you're the best dev on campus, do that, right? So wherever you get this time value of effort, right, just pick that up and switch it off and keep working on that.
Absolutely makes sense, Paige. I would like to talk more about that PhD and startup wala thing that you mentioned. Were the only two parts that you were like for you which made most sense.
Yes.
So if you could elaborate, what was your thought process and why do you think, like on what basis did you conclude that maybe these are the only two paths for me?
So I always felt that uh, places where I did well was when I moved faster than everyone else on system design, right? And at that point, you end up with two things, right? Either you're designing a system of people, right, which is a startup, like faster than other people, right? And it's not business and startup, right? Versus you're doing a PhD wherein you're speed running all the CS concepts that you have in your head, right? And just going at it one by one by one, right? So at that time, I had a total of two options, even after graduation, and even 1 year after graduation, right? Which was NYU CS, which is pretty prestigious, right? and on finance, right? So that was something where I felt that if I'm so like struggling so much to take a PhD decision, right? Maybe it's not the best path for me, right? Along with some concerns around immigration and so on, obviously, right? Because I'm an Indian citizen. So those were a few reasons where I felt like I'm, having looked at people who went abroad and what they were trying to do and what they thought they were going to do and end up doing, right? So that like sort of said to me, hey man, like you got to stand on your own, right? If you try and be part of one of n things, right, it won't really work out. So yeah.
Very interesting. And was there any speck of doubt or fear that कि गलत decision ना हो जाए, like on those lines, or like were you very clear कि I have to go and do on finance?
Galat decisions do happen, right? But galat decisions can be corrected, right? I mean, like there's some which can't be obviously, right? But most like career decisions which people take are well within scope of correction, right? And so that was never like a concern for me, right? Plus, obviously having seen my dad, like how he led his trajectory and so on and so forth, right? When covering like a local state college with a number of experiences and doing XYZ other things and accomplishing such projects, right? It made a lot of sense that fine, like okay, what happens like if you have a BITS degree, you have a like if you have a BITS CS, right? And you're still not taking like a 1 year risk, then I mean like you gotta really count your chickens.
That's a really inspirational thought process, I would say. And like even I see, and it happens with me as well, that we just keep on aversing risk, but we don't realize that the support system and the alumni network and everything we have from BITS is more than sufficient for us as a backing to take risk. So it's a very important point.
Yeah, exactly. Like when people talk about college or tag lag jayega, college or tag lag jayega, right? They never really do part two of tag lag ke kya hoga, right? And that is for you to figure out. क्या टैग लग के कंफर्ट आ जाएगा, क्या टैग लग के कॉन्फिडेंस आ जाएगा, depends on what you get from that tag, right? And that's the thing.
So if you were to tell me one major learning, one biggest learning out of the 4 years of yours at BITS, what would that be?
I guess peer group matters, right? And I mean obviously the wider BITS peer group exists, right? But everything from your hostel inmates to the people you sort of have lunch with and like the people you go to class with and so on, right? All of that matters way more than expected, right? Way more than people anticipate, right? Within BITS as well, right? The ability to select people who have the same sort of thought process slash objective as you, right? Is quite important. So, for example, amongst our entire friend group of 13 folks, right? I think none of us has a GPA greater than 8, right? But like post 1 year of like graduation, right? Most likely like top 1 percentile in terms of financial outcome. But like that is the main idea because the peer group that I sort of want to select was people who are always talking about CS. You get me? Yeah. Not because there's an exam tomorrow, not because they're trying to pretend to like CS, right? Because that comes up very quickly, right? In 4 years, like you cannot pretend for 4 years to like something and like fake your personality, right? That comes up very quickly. So people who have that sort of system level base understanding, once you find them, once you find like your sort of friend group, that could be a department in BITS as well, right? Just hang on to it, right? That's the most important thing from BITS.
Very interesting. So do you like now also very actively try to be around people who are into CS and tech and AI?
Yes, and I feel that's less by intent, right, and more by consequence. In that, if you keep talking about AI and CS and this, right, you will eventually fall on the ears of people who are also talking about AI, CS, and this, right? Yeah. So I think that's the thing, right? So yeah.
But like in the period when you graduated, when you had graduated but not started on finance, like I want to know. So in college, because everyone lives in same hostel, we have similar classes, similar courses. So it's easy to find people
Fair.
who have similar objectives or similar interests.
Fair.
But once we graduate, like this is as per my limited understanding, the avenues are much lesser. You have to make a conscious effort to go somewhere to network or find people with similar mindset. So was there ever a problem or a challenge for you?
No, because I feel like if you keep doing what you're doing, right, and it's like being done by more than 1,000 people, like all 1,000 of you will find each other, right? Either in financial outcome or at events or in a business decision or wherever, right? And I feel like that is the best approach to doing stuff, right? Wherein, like, if people have clarity on what you are doing and you are actually doing that, right? You will find it a lot easier to find people who share interests, who share like stuff like that. Because I feel the thing that people are more worried about, right? Like I'm the most worried about is that, say for example, you have an interest, right? And you go and put yourself out and like people might not like it. But so, like, not a lot of people like marine garbage collections, a $10 billion a year industry. Like, that does not mean anything, right? Not a lot of people like playing real time strategy games, right? But even so, like, the matchmaking servers of all these multiplayer games are always full. That means there are people, right? And it's purely about agency, right? And that will pull yourself together, right? Because once you find someone who you believe as well to have genuine interest in what you're talking about, why would you not keep talking about the same?
It will after one time become very natural, I guess.
Yeah.
Very interesting. Okay, great. So now let's come to OnFinance AI. Tell us what is OnFinance AI and what is the problem that you are trying to solve?
Fair. So, like in one line, OnFinance AI builds AI co-pilots for financial services firms, primarily focused on asset management companies, lending firms, and exchanges and security brokerages. So these four sub fields of those, right? And very slight focus on insurance as well, right? But this is what our core bread and butter is around, right? So the main thing that people do struggle with, right, in financial services is that there's a lot of inference to be made on things which are not always available and not always queryable, right? In that, it is very easy to see that a company's revenue is going up and say, hey man, like, let's take a bet, right? It's much harder to, say for example, look at say a public food delivery company, for example, right, which has some competitors in the private market and say, you know, when those people come public, right, will they be better investments than this one, and should I save my capital up for those people coming in, right? Or should I put in my capital now, right? So this is sort of a gap between, you know, what people want to know, and because that's a real capital allocation decision, right? And what is available of you, right? So, for example, in terms of, so our focus is primarily, as we say, on enterprise finance, right? So, people who lend money to enterprises, people who do exchanges for enterprises like NSE and so on, right? Like people who are like brokers for them effectively, security brokerages that are dealing with institutional players, insurance companies who are now starting to sell to enterprise insurance plans, right, of different types. So, that is sort of our focus, right? Because over there you're working with limited clients, right? And it is very, very important that your people, right, whether that be your research team, your relationship team, or your compliance team, even for that matter, like more importantly, your compliance team, right, sort of appears prepared, knowledgeable about the customer, right? And is sort of able to retain context over a longer customer relationship. Because what happens in normal banking is all been appified, right? And for good reason, obviously, right? And people are able to do their transactions much more simply, right? But say, for example, you were going to try and lend 100 CR to Vedanta, right? That is not the same decision as approving a home loan for me, right? And how many Vedanta limiteds are out there, right, for you to sample data off of, right? And that's what we sort of wanted to go into, like, and solve at the foundational model layer, right? So prior to this, use a lot of foundational model. Like not use like hack around a lot of foundational model stuff. Try to do like get some implement and some and didn't deliver out, right? Because of the workload of the number of users coming in. But what does stand out here is that once models became more capable of multi-step thought process, right? That's when we were sort of very excited and started to like jump into on finance, right? And whatever gaps we felt in terms of adapting that to the FSI sector, and especially the FSI sector in India, we sort of solving that on a technical level.
Very interesting. And also you used a word AI co-pilots. So if you could elaborate that in simple language.
Fair. So think about it like this, right? If I'm taking off a plane, do I know, and like everyone has seen plane dashboards, at least in photos, I'm assuming, right? You don't know which button to tweak, how much and exactly at what degree and so on, and like throttle and all of like, throttle, but like other than that, right? On how to take the plane off, right? And wherein your co-pilot is what comes in and sets the same defaults for you in a way for that takeoff, right? And that is sort of what we realize is that when there's a lot of unstructured data available, right? The amount of unknown unknowns increases quite a lot, right? So, is there a model which has domain specific knowledge on your workflow, on your deliverable, right? To help you navigate those unknown unknowns better? Because the known knowns you obviously know, right? And the known unknowns you can web search, right? On Google or wherever, right? But how do you handle that area? So, for example, if you're a new analyst, right, and someone tells you, hey man, make a report on the investability of, say, for example, Adani Gas, right? And now you actually end up missing out some foreign players who are trying to make a JV in India, like a joint venture in India, right? Because obviously you can end up missing out things, right? Because you're not on track with all the joint venture things. You'll never be able to search that back, right? Because joint ventures is just one topic, right? Joint ventures skipped your mind as a topic. Another thing could skip your mind, a third thing would skip your mind, right? And so on for every task, right? So sort of completing the intent of the task is what the model does, and then you get the answer, obviously.
Very interesting. Also on LinkedIn, I saw that there is OnFinance AI and then there is NeoGPT. Something called NeoGPT. What is that? If you could tell that.
So basically, when we started with deploying LLMs on like for enterprises, right? The very first model that did fine tune was called was Bloom 176B, right? And so the main issue with that was it was very expensive to inference from, right? So like inference as in like get responses from, it was very expensive to host it in a way, right? And the thing that we sort of wanted to cover up at the model layer, right, and expose that API eventually as well, right, is how do you distill knowledge into a much smaller model, right? So say for example, the latest Facebook models which have come out, the smallest version of them, right, is somewhere around 100x cheaper than GPT-4.
Oh.
Like the new one, the GPT-4o. Yeah, the GPT-4o one, right? And at that point, like it becomes a real thing, right? For a real recurring enterprise use case that may have like a million calls a month, a million calls a day. You're not going to use that, right? And so we wanted to solve that at the model layer. And the second thing we want to solve at the model layer was feature explainability, right? Say you have a report, right? Credit report that you're making, and it has some topics in it. Now the thing is that a non-technical stakeholder who does not really get here, obviously not know their domain, right, would want to know is why are only these topics fit?
Oh.
That's the first question which will come in, right? Like you try and give anything, right? That's the first thing that people will try and rationale over, right? And obviously you can give citations. We do give citations. You can give confidence score, which is like how similar it is to the context of how previous tasks were done and so on, right? And you can give safety ratings as well as per the regulators' latest regulation. Is this answer safe or not? So we give all these things, right? But the second thing you want to sort of solve was that can you explain which features get triggered? So this is like a pretty new thing done by Anthropic, right? Called mechanistic interpretability. But like the monomotor thing around that is that you can effectively manipulate the weights of the model, right? To make it say n number of things or not make it say n number of things, right?
It is.
And that is much more enforceable than giving a prompt saying don't say XYZ stuff,
Yeah.
right?
Yes.
Which can be jailbroken. So yeah.
Very interesting. Also, I got to know that OnFinance AI has become the first Gen AI startup to have signed a contract with NAC, National
Yes.
Stock Exchange. Firstly, congrats for that.
Thank you.
I would like to know how did NAC happen, and so like this is something I have heard from a lot of people that generally these big organizational players are little apprehensive, at least in the beginning, to partner with the startups, at least young startups. So was there apprehension from their side? How did you convince them?
No, I think this has nothing to do with me, everything to do with Anuj, right? And I think he did the whole job on this one, right? So wherein, all the way from getting the technical stakeholders on board to getting the business use case team to getting the use case out and so on, right? And specifically, yes, the second point is true. Like I think NSE has a revenue floor, right? Below which they don't work with companies. It's just somewhere around I think 150 CR, right? And they sort of changed their role for us, right? And the core reasoning behind that being that there was a 10x, 20x disruptive value to their team, right? Simple as, right? So if your business team does some governance reporting, for example, right?
Yeah.
And like, so a lot of this is on public data, so I'll just say that, but like, obviously not going to the specifics, right? And on that governance reporting, if it used to take them, like for all the listed companies to cover 2 or 3 months, right? And now you're sort of helping them do that in like 12 days across all iterations, right? That is worth bending rules over, right? And that's sort of what we've gone out and delivered there, right? Delivered that multiple times, right, for different teams. Because we are at the foundation, I mean, not exactly the foundation model here, but because we're working with foundational models, right? You're able to move more flexibly. A lot of the old players with their long 100 200 product page catalogs do struggle quite a bit, right? And at that point, it does end up being a problem of plenty for them, right? Because they have 200 workflows and number of resources attached to each and so on and so forth, right? Where now you come and say, okay, guys, this is the same module, right? You want it, everyone get access, right? And go through that. And I think that has also been why the IT team does not have many problems with us, right? And so, yeah.
Very interesting. So, Priyesh, now a slightly different, we'll go into a different direction. Tell me, how has building a startup, being a founder of a tech startup, changed you as a person?
Yes, that is true. So, I think at some point you do have a number of problems in life, right? You try and run for help, right? But when you become a founder, you realize that you are the help, right? So that is what changes in you fundamentally, right? And the amount of agency, the amount of people you meet, the amount of talented people you meet, right? The amount of clarity that you get before and after every meeting sort of amplifies 100x after that, right? Because you know that there's obviously teammates, there's investors, there's customers to back you, support you, right? And all of that stuff, right? But at the end of the day, you are the help, right? You're the one who customers will be calling when things don't go well, right? Investors will be calling, team members will be calling, right? Future investors might be calling, right? And once you sort of get accustomed to being the help, right? Then I think everything else takes over on its own, right?
But did it take time for you to get accustomed to it?
Yes, like maybe a month or two after I left Geo7, right? So I left them on December the 1st, right? I think it was around February-ish, and I felt okay. Now I'm there, right? There's obviously experts that you can ask, like specific advice from and so on, right? But you're the main help, right? And as long as you're willing to carry that, you'll be good, right? The day you can't, like, you to someone else go. But then, like, till the day you're doing this, you have to have that mindset, otherwise you can't pull it off.
It's very interesting because I can relate to it, though I have not built a startup. So when I was in my first year of BITS, so whenever there used to be a problem, I'm not understanding anything, I'm not getting the CV that I want, I used to always go to my seniors and ask them for help.
Yes.
Even if they couldn't help me, they will just send me that relax, everything will be fine. But once I came to third year and all my seniors went for PS or for internship, etc., all of a sudden it felt, who can I reach out to now? Now people are reaching out to me, my juniors are reaching out to me. And it took a while to, get into that mindset. Okay, now I have become the help. So yeah, it's a completely different mindset. So, yeah, and for me, it also brought a little bit of anxiety in the starting. Very interesting.
Yeah.
How has your relationship with Anuj, because you have known each other from college, how has that evolved after you started on finance?
Yes, so like we met a couple times in college. The main time we met was I think when I just joined Savan, like a couple of months after I just joined Savan. And
That time you were in Bangalore?
no, I think I was lockdown, no?
Oh, that was lockdown. Okay.
It was lockdown too, right? And I was like, this person's been on this for like 6-7 months, does not seem very fickle, because that is what I sort of struggled with. Like, so the two things that I sort of struggled with overall was being very fickle with what I was working on, right? As many tech people are.
Yeah.
And the second thing was that being able to be persistent enough to get into the right rooms regularly enough, right? And so I sort of felt that I'm going to handle those two things for this business, right? And obviously for these two things I do consistently rely on him, right? Yeah.
Okay. So we are almost at the end of the podcast. One last question to you, Priyesh, is, and this is particularly for the current students who are studying in BITS or anywhere who are watching this video. Any piece of advice you would like to give to someone who especially wants to get into tech and build his or her own startup? Like anything they should be doing or they should start doing right from their college?
I would say being online in the right Twitter and Reddit circles is the most important, is the easiest way to leapfrog other people, right?
Very interesting.
Because obviously people have geographical constraints, capital constraints, and so on, right? So you can't go to the US every time you feel like there's a disruption, right?
Yeah.
But you can obviously talk to the right people on Twitter, you can follow the right people on Reddit, the right subreddits, right? And second thing is, this is a very high agency business, right? Like, it's a carrier of a million compiler errors, right? So, get your first million compiler errors as diversely as you can, right? And trust the process. Try building good primitives in your head. The primitives of tech are very, very reapplicable, right? And some people might find this surprising, I know, but the courses that were taught in college are the right courses for a CS degree, if you have a CS degree, right? If not, those are the right courses for a CS degree, right? And you will find that people are talking about a number of new things, old things coming into new forms, new things going into old forms, and so on. But I don't know, is it 14 CDCs that everyone has?
Yeah, I guess so.
So the 14 CDCs that you have, right, all the way from object-oriented programming till the last one, which is computer networks. Or computer architecture, I don't know. No, computer networks, yeah. So that, all of that is core CS, right? If you have that at the back of your hand, right, you have no problems, ever, right? And this is not me saying कि मतलब notes रट के कुछ कर लो, है ना? You know when you have it, right? You know when you have it, and when you do, nothing will feel hard in CS, right? It'll take some time for me to get there as well, right? But I've come to the realization that this is the right approach, right? The 14 CDCs that were core, and the 4 the 4 math CDCs that you have as well, right? M1, M2, M3, and process.
So, very interesting. Also, could you suggest names of a few handles from Twitter that you currently follow, that people can follow for tech and other things?
Yeah, so I do quite niche tech stuff, right? Within AI as well. So I can tell you a couple that you can try. So and you can go to their website and stuff because a lot of these people also have their website where they publish the blogs regularly, right? As opposed to Twitter as well. So you can look at Sholto Douglas from Google Research, right? So he's quite new into Google Research, but he moves very fast, right? Uh, if you don't want to look at different people's handles and just want one place where it just keeps happening, Dwarkesh Patel has the best podcast in AI by far, right? By a very big margin, right? And the third person, not his Twitter but his website, is Neil Nanda. Right? So these three people, like I feel like in no order. Like I mean, there's a lot more people, right? Codestar, who's like his real name is something, but like his handle is Codestar, right? So who handles ML research at Mosaic Labs, right? He's a good friend on Twitter at least. So do give him a follow as well. Because you should always keep doing a friend shout out, right? Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much, Priyesh. Thank you for giving us time. It has been wonderful talking to you.
Same.